All right, today we're going to be talking about the first entry in the Faithful and the Fallen series. That is, of course, Malice. I absolutely love this book. I couldn't put it down. If it gives you any sort of idea, I picked it up on Friday, and I was finished. I started reading it actually Saturday, and I actually finished it on Sunday. And I've heard a few people say the same thing, that once you start reading it, it's just incredibly hard to put down, which is exactly what I think most of us look for in books. So details aside, definitely recommend this one if you haven't checked it out already. And it's pretty much, especially if you're a fan of grimdark, which I'm assuming you are. That's why you're watching a review for the Faithful and the Fallen series. It's almost everything you're looking for in grimdark. I hesitate to say that because it's not like the perfect book by any means, but it's just a great example of grimdark writing. There's morally gray characters, characters you're unsure about their alliances and like what side they stand on. I will say that there's a little bit more well-defined, who's good, or which side is good and which side is bad, because the whole premise is it's kind of like the gods are going to war with the demons. Basically the angels are going to war with the demons is essentially what it boils down to. They use different names, like the angels are called Benelin, and then the demons are called Chemodish or something like that. I'm sure I'm butchering the pronunciation. So in that sense, there's a little bit more well-defined of like, okay, these are going to be the people you're rooting for, but there are plenty of characters who kind of tread that line, and it's pretty unclear, especially in the first book, which side they kind of align with. Some characters, seem to have the right intentions, but you can kind of tell they're maybe falling on the wrong side of things, just by the nature of their situation. It's really nothing that they went out of their way to do. They just kind of got caught up in the wrong camp. And like I was saying, it's just, that morally gray, that those characters we love in grimdark, there's definitely a lot of that. I will say one of the characters, one of the main characters you follow, I think he actually probably gets the most page time in the book, is Corbin. He's, a 13, 14-year-old kid throughout the book. And it's just a great, coming of age story. And you can definitely tell he is one of the characters that, it doesn't seem like there's anything morally gray about him. He's very much, trying to do the right thing. And for the most part, he has, his temper sometimes flares up, but it's nothing major. And that kind of brings me to my next point, is just the characters in this book. For the most part, I loved them. Like I said, Corbin, he was probably, my favorite plot line. My favorite character to follow. It's just a great classic coming of age story. Yes, he's a blacksmith's son, but it doesn't feel like tropey at all. And it's just really well written. I will say some of the foreshadowing in the book seems to be a little heavy-handed. Like, okay, this was pretty obvious, but nothing really that takes away too much from the writing. I think that just more has to do with, I think this is John Gwynn's first published book, I want to say. I want to say he wrote The Faithful and the Fallen first. I know he has another series, but, and I think it just comes down to that. So that's a slight criticism. It doesn't really detract from much. So overall, the writing was definitely, I felt really strong, especially considering that this is his first published book. I really hope I'm right on that, because if it's not, his first published book and he wrote the other series before Faithful and the Fallen, then, that doesn't quite hold so true. But I feel like, given the fact that this is his first published work, his writing is really, really well done. The slight, heavy-handed foreshadowing doesn't really bother me at all. It's very slight. It's not like anything crazy or anything where you're like, okay, you couldn't make this more clear. I just thought there were parts where it's like, oh, okay, that's how this is going to play out, sort of thing. The plot line, like the conflict is very obvious, and I don't know if he meant it to make it that obvious. But in regards to the world, I actually really liked it. There's not like a ton, it's not like anything like Malazan where it's like this huge gigantic world. It feels pretty small. You have, you know, groups that are sailing from one side of the continent to the other, you know, and I think, you know, 10, 15 days. So nothing crazy, nothing huge and expansive. It is kind of interesting. The world's kind of broken up into these, they're kingdoms, but they're almost like provinces. But it's just a little bit interesting because you have all these kings and queens that consider themselves kings and queens, but you have also at the king of one province is the High King, who kind of technically rules over all of them, but it's very kind of loose because at the end of the day, you know, you're still, because they're calling themselves kings and queens, it's a very loose, you know, command he has over them essentially, and you kind of see that develop and play out, and it makes things pretty interesting. And then as far as the magic system goes, it's kind of hard. It's a very soft magic system. You don't see too many instances of it actually in the writing, at least in the first book. But from what you do see, it seems, you know, like it's going to be pretty soft. It may get a little bit more well-defined as you read on in the future books. You know, kind of is a classic. I feel like for first books, when there is a soft magic system, it's all about like, you get very small glimpses into it and it kind of like builds your interest, like, oh, I wonder where this is going to go or how they're going to use this. So if you're looking for like a super strong, well-defined magic system, like, you know, anything Brandon Sanderson writes or like Lightbringer, it's probably not for you if you absolutely need that in a book, because it is pretty soft. It's more like, you know, a Song of Ice and Fire type magic system. It's kind of just in the background and used as necessary. But yeah, in general, it's just, if you're into grim dark, pick up Faithful and the Fallen, move it up a few rungs on your TBR. I moved it to the top of mine when I started hearing about it, and I don't even consider myself a huge grimdark fan. I am definitely getting more and more into it as I read more. I'm a couple books into First Law, and I'm loving that. And I just finished Lies of Locke Lamora, the first one in Gentlemen Bastards, and I love that as well. So I think I'm kind of just slowly starting to realize, like, oh, maybe grimdark is kind of the genre for me. But yeah, there's a lot of like very high tension, a lot of politicking, a lot of plotting. You can see things are going to be coming to a head, and there's going to be some serious conflicts down the road. And you do get a little bit of that in Malice. And then there are also those classic characters you find in grimdark. You love to hate the Joffrey types. There's a couple. There's a kid, Rafe, who's kind of Corbin's rival that you absolutely despise. And there's a few more who I won't mention for the sake of trying to keep this as spoiler-free as possible. So yeah, overall, if you love grimdark, give Malice a shot. I don't want to guarantee that you'll love it, but you're probably going to love it. It's nice. It's long. It's 600 pages, but it doesn't feel long, if you know what I mean. Just because of the nature of it, it's so good. You just find yourself reading every single minute in your free time. I found that it, you know, feels a lot shorter than it actually is, if that makes sense. But yeah, that's my review for Malice. Highly recommend. Go out, get yourself a copy, or order it online. You won't regret it if you're a grimdark fan. If you're not a grimdark fan, maybe not the series for you, but I'd still recommend giving it a shot.